They sent one of ours back to us first. That is the part I have never been able to set down in all the years since, and it is where I have to begin, because everything the reclamation did afterward was already written the moment we understood what the thing walking up the ramp of the relief station on Corin had once been. I was Chief Warrant Officer then, Reclamation Corps, which in peacetime is a quiet trade. We recover the dead. We match a body to a name, close the name out of the ledger and carry it home. It is patient, unglamorous work, and men who do it for long enough stop flinching and start keeping. That is the word we used among ourselves. We were keepers. We kept the dead until they could be given back. I was aboard the tender cairn when the report came in from Corin Station, and I read it twice before I let myself believe it, and then I did not sleep. The Meridian Fold had been a relief convoy. 6 ships, white hulls, the old cross and open hand painted large on every flank so that no one in the dark could mistake what they were. They ran medicine and clean water and field surgeons out to the frontier colonies, the small hard worlds where a broken leg could kill you, because there was no one closer than 3 weeks to set it. The crews were not soldiers. They were doctors and corpsmen and hydro-techs and a chaplain, and the kind of pilots who fly slow because their cargo is fragile. 240 souls across the 6 hulls. I want to name that number and then I want to stop nomming it, because I will not build what comes next out of a body count. That is not what this was about. It was about what was done to the 240, which is a different and worse thing than how many they were. The Meridian Fold went dark at the Sarn Reach, a shallow fold corridor on the edge of concordance space, and for 11 days the assumption was a drive failure or a corridor collapse, and search tenders like mine were being tasked to go looking for wreckage. We expected to keep them. We expected the ordinary grief. Then a concordance courier crossed into human space under a neutral beacon, and put a single passenger down on the pad at Corin Station, and departed before anyone could hold it. And the passenger walked up the ramp into the relief hall, where 40 people were waiting to receive what they thought was a returned survivor. It had been a woman, the station's medical officer, a steady man named Aldous Prynne, who I later served alongside and who never once raised his voice about it, recorded everything, because that was his training, and because he understood before most of us did that a record was the only weapon he had in that hour. The record is how I know. She had been refined. That was the concordance word, and I use it deliberately, because our words for it are all too soft or too loud, and theirs is the honest one. She had been taken apart while she lived and put back together to a specification. The long bones of her arms had been sleeved in a gray alloy that the concordance grew rather than forged, and the alloy had been keyed into the nerve so that the limb answered a signal and not a will. Her eyes had been replaced. Her jaw had been reworked to carry a delivery gland. Her spine held a governor that could be spoken to from a distance, and someone had spoken to it, and she walked up that ramp and into the crowd, and the governor did what it had been installed to do. 11 of the 40 in that hall died before the station guards understood that the returned survivor was the weapon, and by then she was gone too, because the governor had a last instruction and she carried it out on herself, and there was nothing left of the woman inside to disobey it. Aldous Prynne recovered enough to match a name. She had been Iron Calb, a corpsman off the relief ship Hollowford, 31 years old, from a river town on Deneb Secundus that I have since visited and will not describe because it is a decent place and does not deserve to be a footnote. She had signed on to the Meridian Fold to run vaccine cold chains out to colonies that could not afford a physician. That is who they took, and that is what they sent back, and the message was not subtle and was not meant to be. The concordance did not gloat. I want that understood because it would be easier if they had. There was no taunt attached, no demand, no threat. The courier carried a single manifest line translated cleanly by our people, and it read as a shipping notice. 1 unit, refined, returned to origin market for evaluation. That was all. To them it was a sample. They had taken a convoy of living people and they had processed them the way a mill processes ore, and they were returning a finished piece so that the origin us could evaluate the quality of the work. They believed, I came to understand, that they were showing us something we would want. That is the alien part, the part that no amount of sitting with it ever made human. They did not hate us. A butcher does not hate the animal. They looked at 240 doctors and saw raw stock of a species with a promising nervous architecture, and they refined it, and they were, in their own terms, being generous by letting us see the result. I read the manifest line in my bunk aboard the cairn and I did not sleep, and somewhere in that long night the grief in me turned to something else, something colder and more useful, and I have talked to enough men from that fleet to know the same thing happened to all of us at roughly the same hour. It was not rage. I have felt rage and it is hot and stupid and it burns out. This was the opposite. It was a settling. It was the feeling of a thing being decided, and then being quiet about the decision, the way a stone is quiet. The reclamation was not a mad thing. I have heard it called that, by people who were not there, who imagine we boiled up in a fury and hurled ourselves at the concordance and got lucky. We did not get lucky. We were already a fleet. Humanity had spent 200 years building shipyards because the frontier is wide and the dark is not friendly, and those yards did not exist for this, and would have gone on turning out cargo hulls and colony ships if the concordance had left us alone. But they existed. The capability was already there, established, patient, the way our whole trade was patient. What changed at the Sarn Reach was not our strength. It was the removal of every reason to hold it back. The order that assembled the reclamation was 3 sentences long. I have seen it. It named no revenge. It named a task. It instructed the fleet to locate the Ulaith Concordance's husbandry worlds, the places where the refining was done, and to end them, and to recover every human they had taken and bring them home. That 3rd clause is the one that made it my war. A lesser order would have stopped at the 2nd. It would have been enough by most measures to unmake the husbandries and call the account settled. But someone in that command chain understood the actual shape of the offense, understood that the injury was not only the killing but the keeping, that the concordance had taken possession of our people, had made them into property and stock and finished goods, and so the order did not stop at destruction. It said, bring them home. It made the reclaiming part of the reckoning. And it put men like me, keepers, aboard warships going forward into husbandry space. Because when the shooting was done, there would be a second and harder job, and the fleet had decided in advance that it would not be skipped. We found the first husbandry world 8 weeks later, and its name in their registry was Ulak, and I will describe it plainly because the plainness is the whole horror. It was a bright world. That surprised me, and it surprised all of us who had built an image of the place in our heads out of the dark it deserved. The husbandry worlds were sunlit. The concordance did their work in daylight, in clean, well-lit halls under a warm, amber sky, because they were not ashamed and had no reason to hide from their own light. From orbit, Ulak looked like farmland. It was farmland. It was tiled from pole to pole in husbandry, long, low structures, ordered rows, transit lines running between them like the veins of a leaf, and it took our sensor crews some hours to understand that the rows were pens and the structures were refineries, and the traffic on the transit lines was stock being moved to processing. Dozens of species were held there. We had not known. No one had known the scale. The concordance had been refining the galaxy's captured peoples for longer than humanity had been spacefaring, quietly, in daylight, turning whatever they caught into whatever they needed, and we had blundered across the edge of it with a hospital convoy and been catalogued like everyone else. Rear Admiral Sabine Oduya commanded the reclamation from the Antram, and she was not a shouter either, which I think is why the fleet held together, and did what it did without becoming the thing it was fighting. She gave Ulak a single opportunity, not out of mercy but out of record. The same instinct Aldous Prynne had shown, the understanding that a thing done in the open and on the ledger is different from a thing done in the dark. She transmitted in the clear on every concordance channel, a demand for the immediate release of all held humans and the shutdown of all refining. She did not phrase it as a threat. She phrased it as a bill coming due. The concordance answered within the hour, and their answer is the last piece I need before I can tell you what we did, because it is the answer that closed the last door. They offered to sell them back. Not to release them, to sell them. The husbandry master of Ulak, the concordance ran their worlds by caste, and the husbandry caste were the breeders, the improvers, the ones who genuinely believed themselves the most refined of all refined things, replied that the returned unit had evidently pleased us, and that Ulak held a further quantity of human stock in various stages of refinement, and that terms could be discussed. He attached an inventory. He attached prices. He attached, God help us, a note that the partially refined units could be finished to our specification, and asked what specification we preferred. He was not mocking us. That is what I need you to understand and what I have never been able to make anyone who wasn't there understand. He was doing business. He looked at the fleet in his sky and saw a customer who had come back for more. Oduya did not answer that. There was nothing in her to answer it with, and nothing in any of us. The demand had been the record. The record was made. She gave the order, and the reclamation began, and it was the coldest thing I have ever been part of, and the only thing I have ever been part of that I would do again exactly the same. We did not burn Ulak in a rage. We ground it. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of what we were. A rage would have cracked the crust and walked away and called it justice. What the fleet did was methodical, and it took 4 days, and it was, I think, the most disciplined violence humanity had ever committed. The husbandries were mapped first. Every refinery, every pen, every processing line was located and logged, because the ones with living stock inside had to be handled differently from the ones that were only machinery, and no one aboard that fleet was willing to grind a pen full of held people into slag, along with the equipment that had made them prisoners. So the reclamation went slowly. It cut the transit lines so nothing could be moved to processing. It took the refineries, the halls where the actual refining was done, the surgeries, the growing vats of gray alloy, the governor foundries, and it reduced them to a temperature at which nothing survives and nothing can be rebuilt. And it did this to hundreds of them across the face of a whole world, in daylight, from orbit and from the ground both, over 4 days. Until the amber sky of Ulak was hazed gray with the ash of its own machinery, and the ground where the refineries had stood had run and cooled into flat gray glass. And then, and this is the part that was mine, we went down into the pens. I will not tell you everything I saw in the pens of Ulak. Some of it is not mine to give away, because it was done to peoples who are not human and whose grief is their own to speak. I will tell you about ours. We found 400 and some humans held on Ulak in stages the concordance called refinement, and we called by no name at all, because there is no clean word for a person caught halfway between themselves and a weapon. Some were early in the process, and could be brought home nearly whole. Some were far along, sleeved and governed and gland-fitted, the woman on Corin's fate written into them and only the last instruction not yet given, and for them there was a mercy we could offer and a mercy we could not, and I have made my peace with which was which, and I will not itemize it. And some, the ones I keep, the ones I still keep, were finished, completed. The person entirely unmade, and only the weapon left, standing in a clean daylit pen waiting for a governor's voice, and no keeper in the galaxy could give those ones anything but a name and a passage home. That is what I did. That is what the third clause of the order had put me there to do. When the surgeons and the marines had done the parts that were theirs, the reclamation details went in with the ledger, and we matched every human we recovered, living, half-made, or finished, to a name, because the concordance had made them into stock and inventory and finished goods, and it was our task to reverse that in the only way left to us. We could not unrefine the finished ones. We could not give them back their years, but we could take away the thing the concordance had done that made me coldest of all, which was the taking of their names. In the husbandry registry they were unit numbers. Iron Calb had been a unit number. Every person in those pens had been struck from being a person and entered as stock. And so the reclamation, the real one, the one that mattered more than any slag we made of any refinery, was the ledger work. We restored the names. We matched a face or a record or a marrow sample, or, at the last, a tooth, to a name off the Meridian Fold manifest, and off every other manifest of every other ship the Concordance had ever taken and catalogued. And we entered the name back over the number, and we carried them home under the name, and we buried them under the name. And where we could find the river town or the colony or the family, we brought the name back to it and did not lie about what had been done. Because the lie would have been one more theft. There were 10 husbandry worlds. Ulak was the first. We did all 10. I do not want you to think it got easier or that it became a routine. It did not. But it did become a discipline, and the discipline was what let us finish it without becoming the Concordance, which was a real danger and which some of us felt reaching for us in the pens and had to refuse. The temptation, on the 4th world or the 7th, was to stop making the careful distinction between the machinery and the held, to stop going slow, to grind the whole surface flat and be done, and let the reckoning fall where it fell. Oduya never let the fleet reach for that, and neither did the keepers, because the keepers were the fleet's memory of why it had come. As long as men were going down into the pens to bring people home by name, the fleet remembered that it had come to reclaim and not merely to destroy. The destruction was the setting. The reclamation was the point. If we had ever let that reverse, if we had ever let the grinding of the worlds become the point and the recovery of the people become an afterthought, we would have won and become worthless in the same hour. The Concordance did not understand what we were doing, and their not understanding is the last thing I want to set down, because it is where the two of us, their kind and ours, turned out to be most truly foreign to each other. On the 6th world, a husbandry master transmitted to the Antram in what his caste plainly regarded as reason. He pointed out, quite correctly, that the humans we were recovering from the finished pens were of no further use. Their refining was complete. They were, by his lights, product and damaged product at that, since a refined unit separated from its governor and its purpose was worth nothing on any market. He could not comprehend why a fleet powerful enough to unmake his worlds was spending its hours and its risk to carry away inventory that had no value. He asked, not as a taunt, as a genuine question from one practical people to another, why were we collecting the worthless? Oduya did not answer him either, but I have thought about the answer for a long time, and I think it is the whole of what humanity is, held up in a single question we could not make an alien understand. We were collecting the worthless because worth was the Concordance's idea and not ours. A person does not stop being a person when they stop being useful. Iron Calb, standing finished and governed in a daylit pen, unable to be given back her years or her river town or her own hand on her own arm, was worth exactly as much as she had been worth running vaccine to a colony that could not pay, which is to say she was beyond price and always had been, and the Concordance had built a whole civilization on not knowing that, and we had built a whole fleet on nothing but. That was the war, not the slag. The slag was arithmetic. The war was that difference, and we were always going to win it, not because we were stronger, though we were, but because a people who understand what a person is worth will always, in the end, out-endure a people who think they can price one. We ground the 10th husbandry world to gray slag in the 14th month, and the Ulaith Concordance, which had been refining the captured peoples of the galaxy since before we came up out of our own gravity, was over. Not defeated. Ended. There is a difference, and it is the same difference as before. A defeat leaves a thing that can rebuild. We did not leave the refineries. We did not leave the growing vats or the governor foundries or the specifications or the caste that held them. We reduced the entire apparatus of the refining to a temperature at which it cannot begin again, across 10 worlds, in daylight, on the record. And then we went down into the pens one last time, and we brought home everyone who was left by name. I carried Iron Calb's name home myself. I had not known her. I never met the woman she was. I met only the thing they made and the record Aldous Prynne kept, and a keeper does not need to have known the dead to keep them. That is the whole grace of the trade. I found her river town on Deneb Secundus, and I stood in front of the people who had waited 11 days for a drive failure and then heard, from a courier they could not hold, what had actually been done, and I told them the truth, all of it, because they had a right to it, and because the lie would have been the Concordance's last theft carried out by me. And I gave them back her name over the number, and I told them it was entered so in the ledger of the reclamation, restored, and would stay restored as long as there was a fleet to keep it. That is the ledger I want read at the end of this, and not the count of husbandry worlds and not the temperature of the slag. The Concordance kept a registry, and in it we were numbers, and they thought that made a stock. We keep a ledger too, and every name they struck out we entered back. 240 off the meridian fold, 400 and some off Ulak. Thousands in the end, across the 10 worlds, not all of them human, and the ones that were not, we returned to their own peoples to be named in their own tongues, because we had learned in the pens that this was not only our war. Every one of them a person the Concordance had priced. Every one of them entered back. They took our relief crews alive and refined them into their soldiers, and they returned one to us as a sample, believing we would want the work. We came and unmade every world they did it on, and we carried our dead home by name, and I have been asked, more than once, by people who were not there and who mean well, whether at the end of it I felt that the account was settled. It is not a ledger you settle, you keep it. The names stay entered and a keeper stays with them. And that is the only answer the dead of the Meridian fold ever needed, and the only one the Ulaith Concordance was never able to understand. You may kill us, and you may even, God forgive you, unmake us, but you do not get to keep us. We came back for our own. We always will. Enter it so.